Welcome to another episode of the Spiritual Awakening Show. I'm your host, Brent Spirit. My guest today is Dr. Daniel Ingram. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us today to talk all about the EPRC. Welcome.
It is great to be here. Thank you so much. And I'm really glad that you're interested in the work of the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium and helping us with that. So much appreciated.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I think this is one of the most fascinating projects and possibly one of the most important of our time, considering the magnitude of what we're really talking about here, which is, of course, emergent phenomena and how we can get our culture to, be brought up to speed with what's happening here. Lots of people are struggling with their various meditative, spiritual, energetic phenomena as a result of meditation practices, psychedelics, yoga practices, breath work, all of these different things that are entering into our mainstream. But of course, they bring about certain challenges. And so the Emergent Phenomena Research Consortium is what we'll be talking about today. If you've ever wondered, what it would take for our culture to really acknowledge these things openly and to embrace it and to be able to support us properly, well, then we've got the man here, Dr. Daniel Ingram, who's made it his mission to, make an impact in this area. So thank you, first of all, for your work in this area. Talk to us a little bit about what emergent phenomena even is. It's a term that we don't hear too often, but I think it's an important one.
Well, thank you. So backing up just slightly, luckily, I'm just part of a very big team. So there's a lot of people around the world who are working on this, and I'm just one of currently 280 something people within the EPRC, with people at a lot of top universities and with diverse range of backgrounds and talents, everything from neuroscience researchers to psychiatrists and psychologists, which you would expect, also to media people, to experiencers, to people who are teaching meditation or yoga, and indigenous practitioners and all kinds of. We've got a very wide range: economists, epidemiologists. So it's an amazing team, and I'm just a small part of helping with that team, just to really give credit where credit is due. And then emergent phenomena. So when we looked at the range of people who have tried to upgrade the clinical mainstream, with regard to the deep end of human experience, broadly defined, what most people would call spiritual, mystical, magical, energetic, psychedelic, etc., phenomena, and we call emergent phenomena, we noticed that linguistics was probably part of the problem. So, going back to the cosmic consciousness kids of the 1880s and 90s, and then William James in the early 1900s, and the relaxation response people in transpersonal psychiatry and psychology, starting really in the 60s at Esalen, and with people like Abraham Maslow, and then Stanislav Grof, and a lot of other people, it's too many to name. And then moving into the contemporary era, we noticed that linguistics was almost certainly a major stumbling block to people in the clinical mainstream, with MDs and PhDs, adopting these sorts of understandings, right? And words like Kundalini are fantastic. I literally use the word Kundalini almost every day, and it's part of my frequent working lexicon. It doesn't scale globally. It's they've been trying to get this term into the textbooks for 60 years, and it hasn't worked. So maybe we try energy-like experiences or something. Has been suggested by the Brown University team, Cheetah House, and the VCE project. Jared Lindahl and Wilby Britton and that team have suggested that maybe we call these things something else, something more descriptive, with less sort of cultural and ontological overlay, meaning statements of what truly is. And so linguistic scaling and figuring out how to get language that the clinical mainstream might be more comfortable, we think, is a critical component of people at the doctoral level, at the master's level, et cetera, being able to integrate sophisticated knowledge of these sorts of experiences to help promote good outcomes. Because not only do you have people who struggle with these things, right? They have an opening in a yoga class and the teacher doesn't know what to do with it because maybe they haven't actually had one, and then they crash into the healthcare system and that goes badly, usually. But there's also tremendous healing potential, right? So as people who've done these practices and gone on this journey know, yes, sometimes it can be rough in the short to medium term, or very confusing or very exciting, but in a way that is disruptive to your life. also, a lot of people, if you go, long enough, over months, years, decades, will say, well, actually, even though that might have been challenging, it ultimately led to some of the most transformative and beneficial experiences of a person's life. And reports of that kind of thing happening are, go back, 2,500 plus years. And, and so figuring out how the clinical mainstream broadly and globally can get information that will help them relate not only to how to help the challenges, which is super important, but also how to appreciate the healing potentials, the mental health benefits, the physical benefits, the immune system benefits, the social benefits, and all the other benefits that can hopefully eventually come with these practices when they go well, despite some of the sometimes challenges. That's really what the goal of the EPRC is.
Amazing, amazing. So the language emergent phenomena is what's referred to in the white paper as ontologically neutral, right?
Yeah,
So,
because we don't know what's causing this stuff, right?
mm,
We don't really understand it. We don't understand the physiology. We don't understand the neurotransmitters. We don't understand the bigger picture stuff, the electrical activities. There's almost no science on most of that. There's a little bit of brain science on meditation, but particularly when it comes to the energetics and Kundalini. And I was actually just talking with some people at Cambridge, just the meeting before this one, about how do we actually how do we study Kundalini phenomena? How do we get the linguistics right? How do we do the EEGs, and if we can do it, fMRIs, and the precise phenomenology to document this, so people doing Kundalini yoga practices or who are in breathwork classes or wherever they run into this stuff, that their teachers, and if they end up talking to a healthcare practitioner, or they tell their family and their family gets concerned, right? How many times has that happened? Lots. So that the world can have a better understanding of these things.
right. So that raises a question for me, which is how can we get those who have not had these experiences to really get on board with the potential of them? To really say, hey, this is something that's real. I haven't experienced it myself, but I want to validate you and support you. That seems like a pretty big gap to cross. Is that something that's been considered by the project?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's one of the primary questions, perhaps the biggest question. So that's really two or three different things. One, it's a question of epistemics. How do you know something? How do you know this is real? Are these people just making this up? I've never had this, so maybe these other people have never had it either. People say things like that, and that's a really common thing to think. And in fact, weirdly enough, even after I had had some of these experiences, I would still think things like that. So I actually started having these as 14 or 15 years old. And yet when I was 18 or 19, if you asked me about mystical, magical, energetic experiences, I would have said these people were crazy, even though I had had them myself. So it's not even just experience. There are additional transformations conceptually, socially, in terms of our roles, in terms of what culture accepts, that need to happen. So that question of epistemics, how do we know, and how do we scale that globally, is a really challenging one. But there are things that move the needle. So we know that neuroscience moves the needle, right? When Dr. Sarah Lazar first put meditators in scanners and noticed there were structural and functional differences about their brains, that changed the conversation, right? And we can measure a lot of these things. We do have sophisticated imaging tools now. These things are being studied at top universities, right? So, Harvard, Cambridge, other universities, major universities are starting to study that. And that can start to move not only the scientific needle, but the mainstream cultural needle. So, for example, there was just an article that came out by Judd Brewer and Matthew Sackett about advanced meditative states that just hit in Scientific American, right? This used to be like, the home of some of the most profound skeptics of anything like this. I read these columns as a kid, and in the 80s and 90s, like the skeptics column debunking things that they thought were too weird. And now they're starting to appreciate this. So there is a cultural shift that is happening. And some of this for individual people is going to be developmental. It's something about them, and they may not accept these things. Okay. But the clinical perspective, we think, really helps to build a bridge. So, for example, I've never had a migraine that I know of. And migraines can do super weird things, right? Not only can they cause you to see white wiggly lines, these common auras that people see, but they can cause all kinds of other bizarre neurological problems, what we call complex migraines with aura. And even though I've never had any of those, right? Like, do I suddenly, we never say to people who are having a migraine with one of these things, oh, you're hallucinating, you're psychotic, when they're seeing whatever weird thing they're seeing. We actually never say that. And so we think that the clinical perspective that just use that as a diagnostic tool to help add value to care. Oh, white wiggly lines, maybe pathognomonic for migraine, maybe don't have to get a head CT, can save money, not expose them to radiation, know what is going on, and just use the phenomenology to be more efficient and effective in my care, to develop a therapeutic relationship with someone, and not say, oh, you're psychotic, which again, we never do for migraines. So if we can not do that for migraines, we can not do it for some of these other weird things. And there's lots of other cases like that. That's just the most common example that I think most people can understand. And it's well documented that migraineurs have these things, countless, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have experienced them. And that's the same with this stuff. And so we think that the clinical perspective actually can help serve as a bridge, because it is very comfortable with first person methods, with subjective experience. I've never been able to measure anybody's pain, right? I just had to trust them, right? I didn't say, oh, you're hallucinating your pain. I never said that. Oh, you're crazy for saying you have pain. We just go, oh, you have pain. That's a useful diagnostic indicator. So in the same way, we think that there is a bridge here that the clinical perspective can play, which is used to subjective experiences for even some very weird stuff.
Fascinating. That's an incredible answer. And it brings me to this question, which is, if we can sort of bridge this gap in a clinical setting to best support an individual, to trust them when they say I'm having some sort of energetic phenomena, and to trust them and then support them, do you think that this could also bring about a dawning of, say, a new paradigm shift globally, where we begin to also collectively acknowledge the potential of something sort of non-physical, call it spiritual, something like that actually existing that can be, that we may have to be more open to as a culture?
So there's like 2 or 3 different things in that question, and I appreciate all of them. The first is this era change? So while I don't mean to be needlessly grandiose, structurally, this is a question we've considered a lot and gone back and look at, what do people consider era change? So era change is like, going from the medieval period to the Renaissance, or the age of modernity and the Enlightenment, or the post-modernity, or whatever it is, or the internet, the digital age, right? Where there are these tremendous shifts in a lot of aspects of culture simultaneously that usually relate to some technological upgrade, but not always, right? Or what happened in the axial age, right? 2,800 years ago, when suddenly 28 to 2,400 or whatever years ago, so I probably got those numbers slightly wrong, where there was a massive shift in philosophy of meditative technology, of medicine and science and mathematics, right? Globally, across, the Greeks and the Sanskriti areas, and what's now called India, and all of that, right? So those kinds of shifts, they're usually identified in retrospect, right? They usually do involve global change, where fundamental paradigms of what is considered normal or acceptable, how the world works, how people think about each other, how people think about themselves, how people think about deep existential issues. So the topics we are studying have the potential to shift all of those, because if you shift the clinical mainstream and what is considered sane, and what is considered okay, and what is considered even valuable, potentially in retrospect, at some point, someone might consider that an era change. Now, in terms of necessarily believing in something else, that's the question of ontology. The EPRC project has recognized that anytime a previous group over the last 140 years fixed on an ontology, like cosmic consciousness is what will get everybody to believe, and will convince all doctors that cosmic consciousness is the answer, for example. So far, they've got a hit rate of 0 for many decades of attempts. Total strikeout. They're not getting anything through. And so regardless of any ontological truths, which I don't know how to prove, we are taking a strictly ontological agnostic approach, recognizing that there will always, as far as I can tell, be a wide diversity of belief. And our question is more functional rather than belief, is how do you support these people coming from a lot of different beliefs, the Abrahamic beliefs, which tend to be sort of Cartesian, right? Or, materialist beliefs, which tend to be, well, materialism is a funny one, because it actually says that literally the sum total of our experience is not the real thing, right? And is not an accurate representation of what's going on in reality. So that actually leaves a sort of a breathing room for a lot of interesting experiences there. But So it depends on so we're trying to stay away from the ontology question and really focus on what adds value in a clinical point of view, because as a good clinician, you recognize you're dealing with people from a wide variety of belief systems, right? All the time. And of what is disease, what is health, how are these things caused? Is this because they had a bad dream? Is this because of ghost attack? Is this because of, the temptations of the devil? Is this because of Jesus healing them? Is this because of a biological molecule doing something, or a stray cosmic ray knocking a genetics? Who knows, right? And so, but as a clinician, I almost never get into those sorts of discussions with people. I focus on how can I lend value to your life today? And if they want to have a discussion like that, a good clinician, generally, you're going to have better patient satisfaction and therapeutic outcomes if you keep a relatively open mind and work with people where they are, as you realize in clinical practice if you do this long enough.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
So
So
it's kind of a long answer, but an important one.
no, but very important. Yeah, there's lots of value there. Thank you. Thank you. Um, so when it comes to say training, education, preparing clinicians, therapists, doctors to be able to handle these emergent phenomena and the challenges that come with them. Um, you know, it's impossible to find a good meditation teacher that doesn't practice, that hasn't had their own pretty intense meditation experiences, or somebody facilitating psychedelic journeys that's never experienced psychedelics. Is it necessary that clinicians have their own emergent phenomena experiences, knowing that we can also somewhat induce them? Um, Maybe not consistently, but in time we might be able to induce them. Would that be necessary for them to better understand and empathize with patients?
I think the answer is both yes and no. And the
Mhm.
reason I say no is I got very good in the ER at diagnosing large numbers of weird, right? I don't mean to say this is all weird, but kind of weird. I'll use the word very loosely and lightly, right? Things that I had never had. Migraines is a classic example. Lyme disease, another one. Kawasaki's another one. Like these, lupus, another one. These diseases that can do very curious things to a person's body, to their mind, to their experience. Strokes. I don't know that I've ever had a stroke, and I got really good at dealing with people with strokes who were having a very altered experience from mine. And so I think that the clinical reality that you can train people who have never had a bunch of these experiences. I had never given birth to a child. I help plenty of people deliver babies, right? Like, there are these things. That's a big life event. And yet there is something you can add in terms of value, even if I've obviously never given birth to anybody, and can help participate and help, reassure and support, and that very powerful process. And so I think this is another one of these. So I on the one hand, very much do not want to disparage the remarkable capabilities of my colleagues in the clinical world to handle, like most oncologists have never had cancer, right? For example, I think, and yet that's what they do. Yeah. And in that kind of way, I think that there is definitely a place for non-experiencers to add tremendous value if they find this field interesting and have appropriate empathy and curiosity. And on the other hand, it is also true that there is something about having experienced these things, right? There is something about having done that lends a resonance, a depth of curiosity, sometimes intuition, ability to synthesize and go, oh, that sounds kind of like this. And well, it wasn't quite like what I had. I'll bet that could be this thing. And to ask really good questions, to have a natural interest. So I think it is both true and not true. And I would hate if the field was closed to only, those who had experienced these kinds of things, and a lot of them. And just backing up, I actually know a number of meditation teachers that are top meditation teachers who, weirdly enough, a lot of people think are very good meditation teachers, who actually may have had vastly less experiences with the things they teach than you might expect. Just
Interesting.
got to put that out there
Yeah.
as insider knowledge that don't need to name names, but they help a lot of people. They really add value. So just so you know.
Yeah. No, this is a fantastic answer. And I mean it opens the door, we're not necessarily uh, gatekeeping and saying, only those with certain experiences can come on board and help. I connect with people going through, say, Kundalini phenomena, And most of the time people report, my friends, family, nobody understands me. They think I'm crazy. I can't open
Hmm.
up to them, or if I
Yep.
did something went wrong. But every now and then they say, my partner, my friend, my therapist, they're so open-minded and understanding, and I can talk to them and they're curious and they ask good questions. They
Hmm.
may have not had no experience about it, but just that curiosity, just that
Yep.
willingness to talk is a huge part of navigating some of these emergent phenomena and the challenges of it, just the space to communicate about them. So even for myself studying as a therapist, there's many things that I haven't experienced, but I can empathize with, I can ask
Hmm.
good questions about. So I wouldn't also, say I can't work with somebody that's maybe suffering from cancer or going through a divorce. I've never experienced either of those things, but I can still support them with my empathy and asking good questions. And I think, you know, um, those person-centered skills, maybe is that fundamental to doing this work for clinicians
Well, I think it's fundamental to clinical work in general,
in
like
general?
having
Yeah.
curiosity, being able to be empathetic. Those are, I think, extremely important. Although, even with regard to those things, there may be exceptions. There's speculation that the reason you find more people who are um, uh, have antisocial personality disorder, meaning they don't feel ordinary empathy in surgery, is because it may actually be easier to be, for some people, to be a very technically skilled surgeon if the cuts you make don't make you cringe when you make them.
Yeah.
So, like, there may be something about the technical accuracy of that curious set of changes that makes people have a different relationship to empathy, that cause people to go into certain professions and sometimes be very, very talented. I knew some surgeons back when I was doing clinical practice that they had no obvious empathy at all, but their technical skills as surgeons were so phenomenal that would I want them to cut on me if I had a problem and that was something that they were a surgeon at? Definitely. Oh yes,
Mm.
they had talented hands. Would I want to talk to them after? Not much, but like, wow, like they had the capacity. And so even with regard to empathy is a funny thing. I think, you just have to recognize there's a wide range of human talents and places in the ecosystem for a wide range of people with a lot of neurodiversity. And so I think that the realm of what's experienced in this realm is so broad that I would hate to say, oh, you definitely must have these things or else you couldn't possibly lend value. We know from the clinical world that a wide range of different types of people lend a lot of value.
Fascinating, fascinating. I read this book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths, which makes an argument that, they just discuss
Yeah.
surgeons
Hmm.
and their ability to not get caught up in whether this person is going to live or die. It's more doing the best job that they can, or people in the stock market, whether
Yep.
they make a lot of money that day or they lose a lot of money, they feel about the same and they do really well in the long term overall. So there's definitely some benefits to, the full spectrum of empathy, perhaps you could say lack thereof. We need a variety of different people in this world for sure, for sure.
And as
Yeah,
the meditation and yoga world scandal sheets continue to tell us, there are plenty of people who ended up ethically, having some serious issues. That yet, on the other hand, while they hurt a lot of people, they also helped and inspired and benefited a lot of people and taught a lot of people useful things. And obviously, I'm not in any way justifying the horrible actions of plenty of terrible people who have abused their positions of power on the front cushion or front yoga mat or whatever. That's all awful. I'm just saying that these things are complicated in terms of who might be able to sometimes lend some value and also sometimes cause a lot of harm.
right, right. Um, so in an ideal world, say a training program for a doctor or a training program for a therapist, what does it look like for them to be informed about emergent phenomena? Is it like what might you see taking place? A course?
Yeah, we would hope to actually have first a fellowship level specialty, right? So postdoctoral, post residency training, um, where that would be a year or two, and then eventually would actually like to have a full boarded specialty that you would come out of medical school or your PhD and do formal training in. And that would involve the usual things that you need to learn. So obviously for any specialty, there's a lot of book learning that you need to do. There's a lot of stuff you need to read. There's a lot of terms you need to learn. We're still developing all that neutral linguistic language for this, and that will be an ongoing conversation for decades and probably centuries, hopefully. And then so there's theoretical knowledge of you need to know something about the traditions, right? Because people are going to often, most people are going to say Kundalini, not energy like phenomena. So you need to be conversant in the language that the people around you in your culture or community, and even broadly, might use to describe and define these things. And then we need technical lexicon words that professionals between themselves and in charts and informal legal situations can communicate. So that there's all the book learning. Just to go to medical school, when you go to medical school, you learn about 30,000 new words, something like that, so that you can communicate and think about what you do, and because there's a lot to learn conceptually. So then obviously there's got to be experiential stuff. So you've got to be in settings where people are coming to you and you're seeing senior people who have already been doing this for a long time, and to learn from the expertise of those who have come before. So we've actually got something called the Expert Opinion Project that we're in the pilot of right now and could definitely use more money for, by the way. So sorry for the shameless plug for fundraising, but where we're interviewing people who themselves have been in the transpersonal world, in the yoga world, in the meditation world, in the indigenous psychedelic world, in the backroom facilitator psychedelic world, and other contexts where they have spent decades individually and millennia collectively helping collectively hundreds of thousands of people with these experiences. What have they learned in the field doing this day to day, usually combining frameworks or working in a specific tradition and figuring out how to help people, right? In the monasteries, in the jungle huts, in the basements in Amsterdam, in California, and wherever they've been doing this, in India, in monasteries in Southeast Asia, indigenous places in the outback, around the world, African contexts, etc., Middle Eastern contexts, mystical, spiritual contexts, traditional European contexts, etc. And what can they tell us? So what can they tell us about the phenomenology? What can they tell us about how to handle it? What works? What doesn't? What the people themselves who have been going through this, what can they tell us? And there's an evolving literature on that we're continuing to develop. But having these people mentor in clinical contexts with people who are doing this and experiencing this and getting to see, because that's how we train people in medicine, right? So you wander around with your attendings as an intern or a resident, and they tell you, okay, this is this, we're going to do that, this is why. And so you get to learn very experientially. So, and then people doing their own research. So, right, as a professional specialty, some people will go into research and actually then help explore and develop new topics that we don't have enough information about, that is of high enough evidence quality to really support practices, or could be of better evidence quality. And so helping to move the field forward. Those are usually the three major ways that we train people for clinical fellowships. And then of course, board certification and testing, defining and developing a particular curriculum of, you should at minimum have competency in energetic stuff, highs, lows, weirds, plateaus, what people think of as powers, what to do about entities and realms, what to do about downloads, how these integrate with psychology, what do you do about the mood shifts, the ontological shifts, the paradigm shifts, and all the other curious physiological stuff that can happen, heat and shaking and visual stuff and all the sensate tingles. And I'm just sort of spitballing a quick list here. That's nothing like the formal list, but we actually do have an article that begins to outline this, that we've gotten out in Frontiers in Psychology, documenting and defining the specialty of emergency medicine. You can look that up with Olivier Sandilands is the lead author on that one. So if you want to know more about that, we have a 135-page supplement that really goes into detail of what a doctoral level sophisticated knowledge of this stuff could reasonably incorporate into its curriculum as a starting sketch.
Amazing. And I imagine that must be the first of its kind to really break down this phenomena in such a way.
Yes. So that's what some of the crucial steps we need towards creating boarded specialties. There are a bunch of others. So, but laying the foundations block by block in the way you build boarded specialties.
Amazing. And I was recently reading your recent article in Frontiers in Psychology about emergent phenomena. And in that, you describe that, like the World Health Organization, the APA, they do generally say, hey, practitioners should be sensitive and aware of client's spirituality. And it's very general, it's very vague. That's about it.
But nobody ever wrote the phone book, which it will
Yeah,
be, of what does that mean? Like, what
right.
should you actually know? What are the details, the nuts and bolts, the fine details? Again, when you get an MD or you go into a specialty, you learn a staggering amount of information, with incredible levels of detail, from the molecular neurochemistry, biochemistry, physiological levels, up all the way through the social and the public health and epidemiological levels, and everything in between, all along that spectrum, imaging and labs and diagnostic and differentials and all of that. Nothing like that currently exists for this field, but we are building it through the
Yeah,
EPRC and its allies.
incredible. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, even in my training to be a psychotherapist, this theme of spirituality, of cultural sensitivity, it comes up often, especially here in Canada. It's because we say we've got a very diverse population. It's important to be sensitive to religion, spirituality, and culture. And it basically stops there. They say, go out in the world, have some experiences, immerse yourself in different cultures.
Mm.
I don't know what they expect us to do, go to different restaurants. I don't understand. It's they acknowledge it, but then they don't say much else.
Mm.
And students in general, we're overwhelmed. There's a lot going on. So to go out and actively learn about these unusual phenomena that we may not have necessarily experienced ourselves, it's almost like, it's not going to happen really. So programming it in such a way, I think would be phenomenal because, of course, this stuff transcends culture, it transcends religion. Um, at- Virtually everybody is exposed to meditation practices now. Psychedelics, all of these things are very, very common. So, you know, I've maybe we're biased, of course, but I think it's absolutely fundamental that this is a conversation being had by more and more people, by everybody, really.
And as psychedelics become more decriminalized, if that trend continues, and as things like MDMA, which can induce these experiences, if it is eventually approved, I know Lycos just got that shot down, and as yoga studios and breathwork and meditation scale into the clinical mainstream and popular culture, more and more people continue to run into these. And again, but the clinical mainstreams, the textbooks are not evolving anything like as fast as culture is. And so we need to help our doctoral friends keep up.
Right. Right. So we've got initiatives to go to other planets. In our conversation before, we were talking a little bit about, the potential contemplative environment of somebody making their way to Mars, right, in a space shuttle. That's like it's like a meditation cave in a sense. Um,
Mm-hmm.
can you speak a little bit about the implications of emergent phenomena happening in those contexts and why it's so important that we do actually consider all of this before, sending people on these extremely long journeys?
Yeah, so part of the EPRC projects, what we call the special projects, which includes space, military, big data, security, et cetera, implications, right? So imagine people having these experiences when they're in control of major weapon systems, right? Or flying like, a fighter jet, or, with missiles on it, or whatever they're doing, or as, 4 of the 500 or so people who have been into space report, that they had a super powerful very seemingly transcendent, whatever that means, or expansive or massive shift in paradigm somewhere in their journey. Some is sometimes called the overview effect, but also seems to involve many other components. And Edgar Mitchell is the most famous of these. And there almost certainly have been others. So, right, if 4 have told us, given the negative incentives to not report such a thing, as it might end your astronaut career if you said something that the clinical mainstream currently thinks is crazy, then obviously they're very, very careful about who they send into space. And these billion-dollar missions, they want people who have the utmost mental health and stability and predictability of behavior. They don't want weirdos or whatever going up there. But the very environment, if you have a 9-month mission to Mars, is going to be incredibly even more contemplative than anything else we've done. And already we know that going up to the moon or going up to orbit is enough to get people into this. And so, Edgar Mitchell ended up founding the Institute for Noetic Sciences, friends of ours, allies in the space, with Dean Radin, IONS, as they're usually called. And there are 3 others, but we know for certain that it's going to be vastly better if somebody is out, on a trajectory that cannot be changed, headed to Mars in a multi-billion-dollar mission, and they have some of these experiences. We think that we know lots of frameworks that can be better than what the main clinical mainstream currently has, which is shut it down with antipsychotics, right? Which is going to cause cognitive impairment and going to cause weight gain and dietary and other issues, and can cause all kinds of side effects and tardive dyskinesia and et cetera and so forth. So we think that there's going to be way better answers to that potentially as part of the potential mix of what NASA, for example, would want to know, or people in military command and control situations might want to know for military situations, right? We've got a space force now. We're going to have people flying around in space with weapon systems, right? So, and probably already is happening. We don't know. But those kinds of people, we want to make sure that if and when they run into these sorts of experiences in those very intense paradigm changing situations, that we have very good answers to help them maintain function and have good outcomes, and that everybody else have good outcomes in the face of what's going on with them.
Yeah, it's I mean it's going to somewhere where we've never been. We don't really know what's out there, but what we do know is that some of these experiences, some of the emergent practices, you could say space travel could be a form of emergent practice.
It appears to be.
Yeah.
Any situation where you're having a massive paradigm shift, like psychedelics, going out into space clearly blows some people's minds.
Can only imagine. So, how about for politicians, people in power? I
Right.
can also imagine standing on top of the world with the whole world watching. That could also be a paradigm shifting emergent practice in a sense, uh, perhaps inducing some severe grandiosity mixed in with some, all sorts of non-ordinary phenomena. What can you say
Yes.
about that?
So while politicians are understandably incredibly reluctant to talk about these things, we know from plenty of other data that the prevalence of these things must be quite high. So something like 25% of college students report they have had a powerful spiritually transformative experience, for example, using that kind of language. And something like 50% of people have seen a ghost. Like if you actually look at the literature on some of these things, and then there's something called exploding head syndrome, which is actually vastly more common than most people think, which if you hear somebody describe it, it just sounds straight up like a Kundalini opening, right? Like if you when you read about it in the textbooks, you're like, oh, that. And plenty of people have had these things, and they can cause major shifts. Or the brain zaps that people coming routinely report coming off of SSRIs, like any Kundalini person is going to be like, oh, I know that one, right? So these things are actually curiously common. And so there's no way that world leaders, right? There's hundreds of people in power in world governments, and something like 190 something, presidents or leaders or whatever they are of nations, and so there's no chance that they haven't had some of these things, right? It's pretty much guaranteed, unless there's some bizarre mechanism that somehow is 100% protective. That would surprise me as a scientist. And so then the question is, how do you handle this when your world leaders might have messianic complexes, or crash into dark nights, or feel very existentially shifted, or be traumatized by these things, and not being able to talk about them, not being able to have sophisticated conversations with them, not being supported if they have a doctor, or there are psychotherapy teams that sometimes support world leaders, right, to make sure they're there. Do they have sophisticated understandings of these experiences? Are the world leaders likely to do better in isolation, not being able to explore or explain? Or if they have every single thing they read and they're looking at and all their internet stuff looked at very carefully, which they are almost certainly in most situations, by their teams and by other people who are watching everything that they do, right? So they might not have sophisticated information or have a channel by which they can look this stuff up without someone monitoring it and becoming concerned. And so how's that going to go? We think it'd be vastly better if doctors and people supporting these people did have sophisticated information, if they were well understood, well supported, had lots of, collective millennia of information on how to produce, not only get back to baseline, but actually produce major upgrades in consciousness and levels of function. As me and plenty of my friends have noticed, if you eventually learn how to do this stuff well, it can cause incredible amounts of healing and benefit and mental clarity and increased empathy and increased ability to do useful things, or to feel calm and collected and clear inside, which I would imagine has something to do with good governance, good decisions in the face of the challenging things that face leaders. And so, in my ideal world, you would even look for leaders who had had these experiences and really deeply integrated them in a really wise and compassionate way, that would be my ideal of who you would have for good leaders. And totally flipping the script and saying, we can't talk about this and a leader shouldn't mention this. This is something I would want at the top of their resume, personally. And so we could envision a very radically transformed world in which we have a very different conversation about how leadership and these things work.
Incredible. It's a really inspiring vision to think about the scale at which this phenomena is accepted, and then we can actually openly, you know, put people in positions of power that have integrated these experiences. That would be, quite quite a shift on our planet. Um, so uh, maybe I'm incorrect, but it seems that one of the most effective ways of supporting people through these phenomena is allowing them to speak about it openly. Would you put that at the top of your list in terms of interventions, in terms of approaches?
So at least in my own personal experience, being able to talk about this openly and having others, the number of people who have reached out to me through emails and I've had conversations with, et cetera, and say, I've never told anybody else this, but I'm going to tell you today, and how incredibly healing and normative that is. And to realize they're not alone, that there's a whole world out there of frameworks of wise people who for thousands of years across many traditions have been figuring out how to deal with this stuff and seeing what leads to good outcomes. Yeah, so I think normalization, being able to tell people's story, can be incredibly helpful and healing in the right context. I've also seen plenty of people who were all excited and thought they could tell their story in a context, and that went badly as a family member, a psychologist or psychiatrist or a police officer or whatever, or their boss or whatever it was, and it went unbelievably badly. So I think that it can really be crushingly devastating to people when they, in a trusting or open moment, disclose these things and they react poorly to it, such as saying, you're crazy, you're broken for life, you're going to be on meds forever, let's take away your rights, let's lose your job, let's break up with you, let's stigmatize you, let's ostracize you from the community, let's do all those kinds of terrible things, which I have heard countless times people report to me. Let's commit you to a psychiatric institution against your will, let's do whatever. So not that occasionally it might not have been helpful in the short term to get them some sort of an intervention, right? So sometimes people can be very, very altered, have an inability to help protect themselves or others or keep other people safe, or to, and so I get it. I'm not saying that none of those things should ever happen or ever inappropriate in terms of helping to support people in a way that leads to them and everybody else making it through the next day or week or whatever. But a lot of the rest of it can be incredibly damaging. And so it's clearly building a better world in terms of people being able to talk about this stuff without being demonized or stigmatized, I think is very important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of and it's funny, we should have a lot of allies in this across the Abrahamic world, like conversion experiences, like most, Christianity and Islam and Judaism, for example, or Hinduism, of course, right? So Buddhism, plenty of indigenous religions and other faiths, which there are many out there, are founded on theen things. And these can be an incredibly important part of their, these people's process and journey. And it's been curious that there hasn't been more alliance around this common goal of supporting these things. Even the materialists. So we recently got a Matthew Sackett and the work we've done on jhanas presented at the Harvard Psychiatry or Mass General Psychiatry Grand Rounds, which is where the whole department of psychiatry, is the biggest research department of psychiatry, got together. And he was presenting data on meditators that can within seconds drop into very blissful, peaceful states of mind. That from a mental health point of view is a superpower. It's also a cultivatable skill. You can learn to do this. And we can, you can teach people how to do this. Something called jhanas, for example, is a very popular conversation right now with articles in Time Magazine and Vox and other places. So and that's the mental health consequences of this in a very real world in the face of the mental health crisis. These are going to be very valuable tools that hopefully we can integrate in the mainstream. Recognize they can also sometimes do very weird things. These practices can also cause some very powerful energetic shifts and disruptions and confusion. So we think that that this is going to be a very important part of mental health solutions going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a very hopeful, it's giving me a lot of hope. So thank you to yourself and the rest of the EPRC team uh, for going about for all of those like myself who have had difficult spiritual emergencies or spiritual crises. Um, you
And
know,
thank you for the work that you do, helping to promote these things and helping people with this stuff. So again, it takes a village, as they said back in the day. It takes a very, very large team. We're all small parts of a very grand effort. And that's not new, right? So we're part of a long, continued conversation of how can the clinical scientific mainstreams better appreciate the deep end. Yeah,
right.
it's an old one.
Yeah. Yeah. So on that note, how can people get involved with the mission with the EPRC? Um, talk to
So
us a
you
little bit.
can go to theeprc.org, theeprc.org, and check out our white paper, check out our videos. You can reach out to us there at info@theeprc.org. If you're a scientist or a lawyer or an economist or a media person or have whatever other talents that might be, neuroscientists, et cetera, some kind of talent that would be helpful, we appreciate that. And it's going to take a lot of people. We could also very much appreciate funding. So if you're someone out there who knows where more money for this comes from, doing the kind of clinical research and neuroscience research and policy work and gathering of experts and all of that that helps us to move the needle at a global scale, that costs real money. Most people are not retired like me and able to do this as a volunteer. So none of this money goes to me. All the rest of it goes to the team as we help to support young and middle-aged and even older senior researchers to continue to do this work. So if you have any idea where the philanthropic funds for this or other grants from organizations or family foundations come from, we would very much appreciate that information because this is expensive. And the more money we get, the faster we can do this straight up and the better we can do it. That's just the bottom line. So, because people need to eat, and
Yeah.
so and so those are major ways that people can help. You can also go to ebenefactors.org. That's the charity Emergent Benefactors. That is the 501c3. If you're looking for the tax write-off, that we aggregate funds and give it out as grants to help support the work of the EPRC and its allies in the space. And help promote our work. You can send this out on social media. You can link people to this. You can tell people about what we're doing. And hopefully we can build a large enough movement to do global systems change a lot more efficiently and effectively.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. So the links will all be in the description if you'd like to get involved, if you'd like to support the project. Dr. Daniel Ingram, thank you so much for all of your great work in this space. We really appreciate it. On behalf of all of those out there going through challenging emergent phenomena, thank you. Thank you. And to the team at the EPRC, thank you as well. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. And to our
Thank you
audience,
so much. I really appreciate all of you listening, and I hope you find this helpful and interesting, and that together we can do great things.
yeah, yeah. And thank you so much. And to our audience as well, thank you for hanging out today. Until next time, much love and peace.